The views expressed on Teachavision are those of the interviewee and interviewer and do not represent Screenless Allies as a whole.
Hello there, and welcome to Teachavision, where everyone has a different vision of learning, episode number 23. My name is Jose Briseño, and we're continuing the series on the interview with Mr. Bill McCann, founder of Dancing Dots. Visit their website at dancingdots.com. All one word, DANCINGDOTS.com. In part 3 of this interview, we're going to talk a little bit more about how Mr. McCann went into music and the obstacles that he faced when learning said music. Also, has the role of a teacher of the visually impaired changed over the years? All that, plus fetishism, right here on Teachavision by Screenless Allies. You mentioned at the very beginning about you getting into music. What made you want to get into music in general?
I think I always loved listening to music, and I had a little record player that my parents got me, and I had a little toy piano. But the thing that really focused me on music was when I was, I think, 5 years old. My mom's older sister married a man from Massachusetts, and they had kids that were roughly our ages. Maybe a little older for me, but my older brothers and sisters. And anyway, when they came to see us, it was fun because we only got to see them once or twice a year. And my cousin Jack, who's probably going to say maybe 7 or 8 years older than I, so I guess he was just like a teenager, he brought his trumpet, and he was good, and he played trumpet, and I heard him, and I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to make that sound. How can I make that sound? And then, it was like, I want a trumpet. Yeah, okay, so I'm fine, right? Nobody
Right.
believed me. And then when they finally believed me, they realized, well, we don't even have money to buy a trumpet for you. I mean, I was number 7 of 8 kids, and the money was not like, okay, we'll just buy a trumpet for you. So long story short, one of the greatest birthday presents I ever got when I was 9 was my parents went and they got $75 and bought an old used trumpet somewhere. And that was my birthday present. And I opened it up and I started playing it. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I started playing it. And that was the magic thing for me.
Did you learn by yourself? I'm assuming musicians first start by just playing random things, and then later on you kind of understand a little bit more how to do this, and then you start playing. Was that your case, or did you end up taking lessons?
Oh, I took lessons. My mom found me a teacher who knew Braille music, because none of the sisters at St. Lucy's knew Braille music. They knew literary Braille. They knew some math Braille. They did not know Braille music. So Mom called around and called over to the Overbrook School for the Blind here, which is still a great school to this day. At that time, it was a residential school. If you wanted to go there, you had to live there. But anyway, she caught up with a woman who was teaching music there, and she knew Braille music. And so I used to go to her house on Saturday morning for about 6 months. I went there and learned Braille music and a little bit of trumpet. It turns out that she was a music ed major, but her main instrument was violin. She wasn't really a trumpet player, but she had a brass class, I guess, and knew enough about, you press this valve to get this note. So after 6 months, she got married and moved away. And that was the last teacher in my whole life I ever had who knew Braille music. But she gave me a good foundation, and I kind of learned and picked things up as I went along. But one kind of fun note on her name was Miss Facenda, and she was from South Philadelphia. And her parents, we went to their home in South Philadelphia. My dad used to drive me down there, and we would go in, and they spoke Italian at home. They were very Italian. They were Italian immigrants. A lot of people in South Philly were from Italy. And very nice people and everything. But the interesting thing is that her dad's brother was a guy that you may or may not be old enough to remember. His name was John Facenda, and he used to do the voiceovers for the NFL football. He was also a newscaster, and if you heard him, you'd be like, where'd this guy go to, like some, upper crust kind of, finishing school? It was like John Facenda. His English was perfect,
Right.
And he grew up speaking Italian at home, so it was kind of cool.
Wow, that's definitely pretty cool indeed. Now, you mentioned Braille music. Did you find any obstacles when learning music in general as a blind musician?
Well, first of all, the Braille music was great when you had it, but you didn't have it often enough. And so, getting the material in Braille was an obstacle. I remember literally walking up to the corner mailbox and mailing off print music to some wonderful volunteer. I think she lived in New Jersey at the time. And, she would get that print music in the mail, sit down with her Perkins Brailler, crank out my trumpet part and mail it back to me. And it might be in a week, it might be in a month, it might be in 2 months, because she was a volunteer. She had a full life and other things. And, I couldn't be like, I need this tomorrow, please.
Right.
So that was an obstacle when those rare and wonderful people who were Braille music transcribers, if you could find one, they were using a Perkins Brailler, which is a mechanical device. So if they made an unrecoverable error halfway down the page, it took the page out and started all over again. It was a very slow process.
Right.
And so that was an obstacle. I think another obstacle that blind people face is you can't look at your teacher while your teacher plays.
Right.
And so observing how, just their posture or how they hold the instrument. Some of my teachers would let me touch their hands or their faces, or even put my hand on their tummy and just feel how they supported the note. And I would do that later with students, but you have to be careful in these days of craziness, but I would say, well, why don't you take my hand and put it on your stomach, so we wouldn't have any misunderstanding.
So that way the next day, you get, the officers called and, sir, we noticed that,
and we've had reports. So fortunately none of that ever happened. But
Good.
You have to be, I think as a blind person, you have to be aware of that.
Right.
Both as a student and as a teacher. So I think that's a hurdle for a lot of blind people. And one of my coping strategies for that was I would ask my teachers to play for me, because I think I have a good ear for how things sound. And so I kind of naturally do the things physically that need to happen to reproduce or imitate that sound, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yes, sir. Makes sense. Yeah, I remember bringing me back a story when I was first learning piano, because I did take piano for a couple of years. And one thing that we were learning was pedaling. But I had to figure out how exactly when you hit the pedal and how it would work. Mm-hmm. And, my teacher was like, okay, I recommend you, when you first start, you do it barefoot so you can kind of feel when you do that. And so I was like, I think I know where we're going to go with this. And so she's like, yeah, get on the floor. And I was like, oh no. And so, the rest is history, but sometimes you also got to sacrifice, because you can feel with your shoe, but it's probably much easier if you can feel with your hand. And so, yeah, but of course nowadays.
The concept of what it is. Maybe.
Right. Though nowadays, if you asked if you could feel their foot for the pedal, oh my gosh, you have a foot fetish. Ew. So I know that, nowadays, but I remember those days. I do know that the obstacle in that situation, and that was actually outside of school as well. I remember that as well. Mm-hmm. That was not in school. I didn't have a TVI that would help me in that situation. It was all a matter of me and this teacher trying to fend for ourselves. So
there's a lot, those are the best teachers though, I think, because whether it's, sighted or blind teacher or whatever, the teachers that can think outside the box. And, those have been my favorite teachers. And I like to think of them as having a heart for teaching, because they want to teach you something. And they're also on the other end of that continuum. I've met some teachers who they've been teaching a certain way for 20, 30, 40 years, and they cannot vary their teaching method. There's nothing it's not even a question of wanting to do it. They can't. They have no ability to do it.
Right.
I had a teacher in high school who was a chemistry teacher. Nice man, but his way of teaching, to show formulas and chemical reactions and different things, he would draw on a, overhead projector.
Oh, I remember those.
And while he's teaching, he's saying, well, this atom here bonds with this molecule and this, and I would raise my hand. Dr. O'Connor, when you say this atom, could you say this atom of oxygen, for example, or this atom? Oh, of course, McCann, I could do that. And he would do it for about 30 seconds. And then he would just go back to the way he always did it. And after like 5 times asking him,
he was just like, you know what?
Like, I don't think you can do this. So, I just got a tutor after school and got through chemistry. But,
right. Did you have a TVI, teacher of the visually impaired? I'm assuming you did in your school days. Did you have a teacher of the visually impaired? And what was their role?
She was my mobility instructor.
Okay.
And here in Pennsylvania, we have things called intermediate units, and they are kind of like in Texas where you have regions, I guess.
Yes.
So, yeah, I had services from the intermediate unit in Delaware County where I grew up. And they were good. They got me books on tape and stuff when they could, but a lot of times they couldn't. So I never had a math book, for example, in Braille until I think my junior year. I got an older edition of the trigonometry book, but I couldn't get the newer one. Yeah, I got through trigonometry, but, I got really old doing all those calculations in my head. And
Right.
So, and I never learned Nemeth code properly, and nobody really could teach it to me. So, yeah, it was a little bit of a stretch. So my math teacher wanted me to take a math analysis course, kind of like calculus in my senior year. And I had some electives at that time, and I had satisfied my requirement for math. I could still graduate. So
So you were like, you know what? Not happening.
I took a course in Shakespeare, and it was much more fun.
Thou art not as wants to learn mathematics.
Right.
Thou art not want to learn its mathematics. So you would say that the TVIs at the time weren't as involved as what you would say like nowadays? Would you say there was a huge evolution in that situation?
I don't know. Because I will tell you, because with my work with Dancing Dots, and we have customers all over the country, I can tell you that mileage varies a lot around the country between what's a kind of typical service and what's not. That's a constant. And also in the 70s, as I mentioned, I went to Catholic school. And so there was a certain amount of like, well, that's a Catholic school. What can we do? I mean, I remember my mobility teacher laughing and telling me, yeah, they told me I could teach you the route to the public high school, which was like 2 blocks from my school. She was like, I'm not going to do that because you don't go to school there. There were weird things like that. So I don't know how much of that was like, okay, we can give you the Braille book we have, but we can't pay somebody to make the Braille book that you need. I don't really know because I was so young. I didn't really understand a lot of that nuance. But I do think, from what I can observe, that the really good, dedicated teachers of the visually impaired, they probably are a little more involved with their students in general, but I don't know. It's hard to gauge.
Right. So it's kind of a mileage varies thing. I know in general with me in high school, that was a whole different, and you were there when this happened. I took a band class and, I only knew basics about the software that I had and no one did research and they didn't know how to convert Finale music files into, embossable files. And, I was doing research off the wazoo and no one wanted to hear me out. So yeah, I've been there. So
yeah, I remember some of that frustration. And I think a lot of it comes down to, with the music thing, is motivation on the part of teachers, on the part of the parents, and on the part of the student themselves. And it's too bad because I get calls all the time from people and say, well, we have this great kid here and she's in her junior year and she's thinking about going to college for music. And she is a great Braille reader. And we heard about this thing called Braille music and we thought maybe she should learn it. And I said, yeah, she should. She should definitely learn it. The sad part is she should have learned it in 4th and 5th grade when everybody else was learning print music. And she and any other blind kid who wanted to be in the band should have learned it, not just the kid like her who's a superstar.
I'll be honest and tell you that my interest for band didn't come in until 8th grade, high school, because I was like, I want to know what goes on behind the scenes at ball games,
Sure.
stand tunes and all that. Like, I just want to kind of see behind the scenes what it's like. And in a way, I did. I got to do it. We just had a lot of obstacles, for my use case. So, but I can safely say after that year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep music as a hobby, but I'm going to take what I learned from a director and use it with my family band at the time. It ended up working out just fine. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Teachavision by Screenless Allies. We'll see you on the next one. Meanwhile, you can check out our website at screenlessallies.com. SCREENLESSALLIES.com. Check out our Facebook, facebook.com/Screenless Allies Official. And most importantly, please tell your friends about us. And if you have any suggestions or comments or questions, you can definitely email those to info@screenlessallies.com. We'll see you next time, and thank you for listening.